Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Farrukh Pitafi. Once again, today was very busy day in Pakistan, especially in Islamabad. On one side, we saw that the Supreme Court of Pakistan continued its, gallantry action that it has been actually taking against the elected representatives of the country and also the bureaucracy of the country as well. We are going to talk about that because that is important. Then, of course, we also saw that there was an in-camera briefing in the parliament which involved Pakistan's army chief and various, senior officials in uniform and in civils. But that is also important because it is happening at a time when there is a lot of talk about division within our ranks, and there's always this speculation what exactly is going to become of the country. On one side, it seems that the lawmakers and the state apparatus is focused on fighting terrorism. On the other side, it seems that Supreme Court does not want to accept the explanation being given to it regarding economy and law and order situation as well. One very clear example of that was yesterday when we saw that Supreme Court actually stopped preemptively a bill from becoming a law. Actually, they stopped it in all applications immediately. So that is also something very interesting because it is thought, and commentators and pundits are saying that by actually taking up a matter that is concerning the Chief Justice's own office, he has violated the fourth clause of Judges' Code of Conduct, which says that no judge should be able to take up such a matter. Similarly, we also saw a rebuttal coming from Supreme Court's, official channels that all this speculation about any kind of physical or verbal confrontation between senior justices of the Supreme Court did not take place. That is also interesting because it also kind of reminds you of something else that happened a few weeks ago when Pembra on its own actually had issued a notice that nobody in the private media be able to comment on the personal conduct of various justices of Supreme Court. We were told that Supreme Court did not ask it, but through our sources now we learn that registrar had wrote a letter to Pembra and that a copy of that is still with the registrar's office. So that is one thing that is interesting. Today, both our topics are going to be about State Bank of Pakistan because State Bank of Pakistan was asked by Supreme Court to release funds for the election from federal consolidated funds. Now the question at this moment is whether it is even allowed in the law. We are going to talk about that, and then of course the second aspect is the good news that UAE has also submitted its assurance to the IMF that Pakistan is going to get $1 billion. So because of that, it is said that nominally at least we have fulfilled all the demands of the IMF and their staff. So whether it is going to lead to any kind of staff level agreement or not, we are going to talk about that as well. But first, let me introduce the guests to discuss the first segment of the program. I'm joined online by Barrister Azmat, who's Advocate Supreme Court. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. And then Mr. Ali Javed Darugar, a law professor at lums and also a legal expert, also joins us. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. Let me start with you, Barrister Sahab. Let me ask you, how unusual is the fact that Supreme Court is now asking the State Bank of Pakistan to sidestep the executive authorities and release funds directly to the Election Commission of Pakistan?
Well, if you ask me, this is unusual. The answer is yes. Has it happened in the past? The answer is no. But of course, what the Supreme Court is trying to do is implement its order. And it seems that the question is slightly bigger than just releasing of the funds. Now, the issue is that probably it has now come down to a point that there is no settlement now. The two sides have locked horns. the Chief Justice and the learned judges with the Chief Justice are bent upon, are now planning on implementing their own orders, and they do not want to shy away from the orders that they've written, and they are sticking to their guns as they speak. The government, on the other hand, is now bent upon not to release those funds, because the government's opinion is that the judgment of 4-3 was in the field and the election shouldn't be held as per the date given in the Supreme Court order. So we are reaching a constitutional crisis. In fact, we are. It's a judicial. There's never been such an anarchy within the judiciary. It's worse than the '97 crisis that we faced then. So unless the judges,
In 2007, is it also worse than 2006, 2007, when lawyers movement had actually taken off?
well, it's different than that, because in that case it was the entire judiciary and the community and the political elite against the establishment. Over here, the things are more complex. There are different multiple battles in which there are, as now everybody knows, there are now two sets of judges. One is led by the Honorable Chief Justice, and the other set of judges, the ones who dissented, they're all independent and have their independent minds, but are in a group, maybe one can say, led by Justice Qazi Fazisa. It's an 8 versus a 7 divide, which
Right.
is unfortunate. And we have two Supreme Courts, as a matter of fact, as one would speak. The eight judge we could come to a point where the 8 judges will be setting aside orders of the 7 judges, and the 7 judges passing their own independent orders. In such a situation, as Justice Manila has also stated in his note, that the only loser in this case is the Supreme
Okay, that might be so, but regarding my original question, how unusual is this? When you said that it is unusual, but I thought that you're going to actually qualify it on the basis of some legal doctrine. You haven't actually done it. You mentioned realpolitik, that there is going to be confrontation between institutions, and this is more, from this I actually conclude that it is more a battle of egos more than anything else. Is it true?
Well, as per the order and the implementation is concerned, the order that has been released today is quite interesting. In the order, the State Bank as well as the Secretary Finance have in fact now agreed to release the funds. The Supreme Court interestingly asked them the total amount in the consolidated fund, and the 21 billion figure that has been demanded according to the Supreme Court order is not even a rounding off error. It's such a small amount considering what is there in the consolidated fund for the non-food budget. So there is a food budget and for the non. So according to the Supreme Court, this amount has to be given. Although the government did try to come up, and the Secretary of Finance did explain that there are so many other obligations, international obligations, obligations with the IMF, that they
I'm,
had to pay
I'm,
up.
I'm,
But
I'm glad that you actually keep on telling us about the methods of the discussion and the order. But my question was essentially about the nature of, judgments that are being passed. The question at this moment is whether it constitute any kind of overreach or not. So I'm not kind of getting that answer. Allow me to actually bring in Ali Javed Darugar as well. And sir, let me ask you once again regarding today's order and yesterday's order, the manner in which it is taking place, I consider it highly unusual for any democratic country, where it seems that a judicial branch seems to be overtaking all other branches, especially the two remaining two pillars, one legislature and now executive as well. Do you think that the Supreme Court, at least in principle, can order the State Bank of Pakistan to release funds independent of the oversight or the instructions of the federal government, or there has to be some checks and balances at all?
This is a very unusual order, but I think this order needs to be contextualized. That what was the reason why this order had to be given?
Yeah.
As we know, the Supreme Court had issued an order as per which they held that elections needed to take place within 90 days, which is not an uncontroversial order. And the opinion within the wider lawyer community also is that the provisions of the Constitution are unambiguous, and this needs to hold. The federal government had
Right.
certain
I'm
grounds.
glad that you are saying that. Let me very quickly ask you, because I think that you are focusing essentially on the constitutional mandate to hold the elections within 90 days. Pray tell me, why is it that there is a different order for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa? Does Khyber Pakhtunkhwa not fall under the purview of the Constitution of Pakistan?
Right. We can focus on that, but I think the essential thing
No.
is
We
that
have to
one.
focus on that because it is a
No,
big
no.
question.
I will. I will also answer that, but please hear me out. The essential rule is that whether you like a Supreme Court order or whether you don't like a Supreme Court order, you may have 1,000 issues with the Supreme Court order, but the Constitution unambiguously states that once there is an order, it has to be followed. And whatever your issues, grievances against that order may be, you cannot refuse to follow an order because you
Right,
think that order is
and
wrong
that
on
has to
merit.
be within a certain limits of possibility. If today Supreme Court, for example, is going to order that tomorrow there won't be any sun in the sky, the sun will rise, right? You can't actually dictate the natural objects, and similarly you cannot actually create physical space and law and order situation when you
No,
might
of
not
course, but
have there.
I think the alternative that we have to consider is that if we give actors this discretion of choosing which Supreme Court order is reasonable and which Supreme Court order is unreasonable, then the implications of that are also very problematic. So as things stand, whether the federal government likes an order, whether the federal government doesn't like an order, and we have also seen that in the past, in the very recent past, once the Supreme Court passed an order in which they held that that the order by the speaker regarding the voice of no confidence was illegal, the sitting federal government obviously didn't want to implement it for whatever reason that they had. They were
Yeah,
hiding
but
behind
my
Article 6.
concern again, Darugar Saab, is that it seems very extraordinary that Supreme Court seems to be micromanaging and assuming roles of various institutions like Election Commission of Pakistan, the State
Sorry,
Bank
if
of
I may just be
Pakistan,
able to address
but you
that.
haven't answered me, answered
No,
my
no,
question regarding
I will
Khyber
answer that. I
Pakhtunkhwa.
think
Darugar
so.
Saab,
Just
can
like
you also focus on Khyber Pakhtunkhwa? Darugar Saab.
right, with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, I think the Supreme Court in its order very clearly said that a separate petition can be filed, and once we hear that petition, we're going to pass similar orders. Now, I'm not
The
here to
suo
defend the
moto
Supreme
was
Court
about two
order.
elections or one?
No, no, I think
The
I'm
suo
not
moto
here
was
to.
about one
Of
election
course,
or two?
it was about two elections, and I think,
Right.
as you
And what
rightfully
was the
pointed out,
conclusion of the judgment that was given, where Election Commission was asked later on also by the three-member court, where clear instructions were offered. At that time, it seemed that the focus first was on Punjab election. Can you qualify
it
why
was.
would that be?
I am not here to defend the Supreme Court order, and I think there can be very serious grounds which can be raised regarding the way that order was issued, regarding the way the bench was constituted, and regarding the contents of that order. So I agree with you there. I think the point which I would want to focus on is that notwithstanding these issues, should the federal government have the discretion of deciding which
No,
order they
but that
want to
was,
comply with?
I understand, Daruga sir, but that was not even the question that I was asking. My concern is how unusual it is that Supreme Court actually, and it is supposed to have a stature somewhere here, actually steps down and comes down to the local level and orders various departments how to conduct their business when there is clearly an executive there. Let me actually go back to Barrister Saab and ask him once again. Barrister Saab, I didn't hear a clear indication that this has anything to do with any constitutional doctrine or any legal doctrine, whatever is happening right now. Am I right in saying that it is merely realpolitik? And if, regardless of whether the, the Parliament of Pakistan or the executive, whether they are behaving in the manner that is becoming of them, the Supreme Court is not behaving in a manner which is becoming of its own stature.
Well, of course, the Supreme Court is not working in an ideal situation. Uh, there has been such an infighting that
This
the
is the
Supreme Court should
problem.
have come down.
Barrister Saab, sorry, I keep on cutting you, but I just wanted to humbly submit that this is the biggest problem in talking to officers of law, that they have to actually maintain some decorum, and that's why they cannot actually give you the answers that might actually be in their heart or their mind. Could you actually qualify what you're saying, that it is
Well,
far from ideal?
I think what is unfortunate is that everybody should be having a certain decorum for the Supreme Court. It is the
Why?
highest court in the land. Of
No, no,
late,
why?
how
Of all the people, first of all, it is the Supreme Court justices who are supposed to maintain that decorum. When they are not, when there is going to be an overreach, why should I or anybody else
who
not be
determines that
able
there
to
is an
ask
overreach?
questions?
Who will decide? Will you be deciding that there is an overreach, or will the Supreme Court itself will decide that there is an overreach?
If
So you
if
can't
I
just
have
refer to the
hang on, Barrister Saab, it is a great line of argument, and I want to carry it forward. If the Constitution gives me a right to do whatever I want within four walls of my house, at least within certain limits, and somebody walks into my house and starts beating me, I am supposed to say that there was an overreach.
The Constitution only allows you to criticize the judgments of the Supreme Court, but not the conduct of the judges. You can criticize the judgment when it's out. You can say the merits and demerits of a judgment, but while criticizing the judgment, there is no other option but to comply with the judgment. This is how our system works in a
Well,
civilized society.
the
There
judgment
can be
does not
there
actually
can be a
focus on my
pushback to
conduct, so
criticize
I
the
am very
judgment.
humbly actually going to ask the question that I'm asking, and it does not actually regulate your conduct either. So we can ask questions regarding the conduct of justices when the questions are coming from within the Supreme Court. Do you think that I'm actually crossing the Rubicon by actually asking these questions?
Well, you can. I'm only telling you what the law is. My understanding of the law is that one cannot criticize the conduct of the judges or their personal lives or how they've come to a judgment. Once the judgment is out there, you can criticize the judgment on legal points. Like this. This is the
Hang on,
law. You've asked a fair question in
the, the,
saying the
the
fair
humble
question
submission
here.
at this moment is, Barrister Saab, humble submission is when we start behaving as if there's a dogma involved, then what happens is that Constitution and perhaps even Supreme Court becomes the first casualty. If we keep on actually behaving as if there's a religious edict regarding overreach of one institution or another, then you know there are sacred cows in the system. There are blind spots which should not be allowed by Constitution that speaks for equal rights for all citizens.
Well, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but if you can ask me a question, I can answer it.
Right. So today's decision, today's order, does it, in your mind, constitute some kind of overreach, unprecedented act at least, or not?
Yeah. Well, is it an unprecedented act? Of course, yes. Is it an ideal situation that the Supreme Court should be in? No. Should Supreme Court? Another good question here would be, or another debate could be, should the Supreme Court be answering political questions? Should the Supreme Court would have given this judgment in the first place? If you ask me this question, I would say, sir, no. Supreme Court should not have gone into this political debate and in these highly charged political issues. These issues should have been discussed with the Parliament. In my opinion, according to the Supreme Court judges, they say that we are the protectors of the Constitution and we've taken an oath to protect it. Hence, we stepped in. If the Supreme Court had to step in, and if I were to advise the Supreme Court, I would have advised a full court. If a decision would have come with the might of the full court, the debate would have ended there. This has unnecessarily politicized judges because, as an advocate of the Supreme Court for about 7 years now, I can tell you something that the judges on both sides, these are one of the most fantastic legal brains. You see, there are 200 High Court judges in the country. Out of those 200 High Court judges, you get the best of the best according to the system. The top 50, these are the top 15 legal brains. When it's a commercial dispute or a criminal dispute, you go before them. You don't get better judges than these. So now these judges who are actually had fantastic legal and judicial careers, right at the end of their careers, have been unnecessarily politicized. And
So, in
is
principle,
whose fault is this? And I would say
Barrister
it is
Saab,
their own fault.
Right, Barrister Saab, so you're agreeing with me that whatever is happening is essentially out of character for Supreme Court justices, the top 15 minds, as you have pointed out, of the country itself, even though there are questions about the merit system, which seems to be broken somewhere, because recently when Judicial Commission of Pakistan actually met to a few months ago, at that time there were serious objections raised on some of the elevations that have taken place. But my question right now, Barrister Saab, is if the system is broken and someone is behaving out of character, especially at a time when the country is facing many crises, including economic crisis, especially when there's a demand that State of Bank of Pakistan should be autonomous. At that time, if the Supreme Court of Pakistan overreaches or behaves out of character, what is the silver bullet to correct the situation? Is there none?
It's a very difficult situation that we are in, but I wouldn't call it a silver bullet. The silver lining in all this could be that, as you've rightly pointed out, the system is broken. The silver lining in this could be that we have a complete reform in the judicial appointment, in the judicial elevation, and the entire legal system. Because apart from these high profile cases which get highlighted, there are real problems. We are at what, 130 and 140 out of 150 countries which have been ranked. So the silver lining could be, yes, let's solve these problems. Let's solve the appointment process problem. And if you ask me personally, the bill that the government has introduced is a fantastic bill. It is just the timing which has been off. You see, as an advocate of the Supreme Court, when I file a case, the case is not fixed for months on end.
Yeah,
The
and
new
again,
bill says the
this is
case will be
true, and I'm glad that you are making this point, although it is already made. But my humble submission is, you are only talking about the timing of the Parliament, and it's codifying a law, when the timing of Supreme Court and the way with lightning speed it has actually taken up 4 petitions, not even sent by the President of Pakistan, by private individuals, and the speed with which they have decided, it seems to undercut the argument that there is only one side which is behaving wrongly. Perhaps there is a concern here as well. Let me welcome the third guest who joins us, and then I will go back to Ali Javed Darugar. Dr. Khaqan Najeeb also joins us. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. Former advisor, Ministry of Finance, and also one of the leading lights who had actually played a pivotal role last time Pakistan, or first time ever Pakistan concluded an IMF program successfully. Dr. Saab, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Saab. Let me actually very quickly go to Ali Javed Darugar, if he is with us. Ali Javed Saab, regarding Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and regarding the modalities of how these cases actually materialized, we saw that there were cases which were being heard in Lahore High Court and Peshawar High Court. And somehow, in its infinite wisdom, the Supreme Court of Pakistan decided, because 2 judges in a services matter had ordered them to, suggested Chief Justice to actually take suo motu. To take suo motu when there was not the need, because there was already an inter-court appeal. If that were to be frustrated, then the matter in any case would have come back to the Supreme Court. And there too, we see that there is the difference in treatment of 2 provinces, 2 federating units. Don't you think at this moment situation is such that we cannot find correction, a button somewhere, a reset button when it comes to the way the Supreme Court of Pakistan is behaving, sir?
Right. I'll just require some time to answer this in a more comprehensive manner. Regarding your point about the fact that the Lahore High Court had already given a judgment, Mansoor Ali Shah Saab in his judgment has already covered this in great detail, that there's a very reasonable ground to be made that if a High Court has taken cognizance of a matter and has already given a judgment, then the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction should be barred. So this has been covered under an order, and I think it's a very reasonable order, and it may be the better order. But be that as it may, I think the fundamental question over here is that there are two different things. One is the manner in which the order is given, whether it's the majority order, and whether it's a good order. We can also talk about this. But I think the risk, which is not being discussed in this program, is that if the government itself is acting as if though the order given by one bench is the majority order, they're appearing before that bench, the Secretary of Finance is appearing before that bench, the ECP is appearing before that bench. The ECP, pursuant to an order, gave a schedule. And then the position that the federal government has taken in the media and the parliament is different. They're saying we don't recognize this as the majority order. In fact, it's the minority order. But once that same bench starts proceedings, then they appear before that bench and they behave as if it's a majority order. Given those circumstances, I think the question which I would like to ask is that is it good precedent for any federal government, whether this or any other government in 10 years, to have the choice of not complying with the Supreme Court order because they have certain grievances?
But that is not the question being debated, sir. At this moment, everybody keeps on talking about the importance of holding elections in 90 days, even though now the matter is 120 days, and 120 days is the new 90 days. But regardless of that, my concern, and this is what I keep on saying, this blind spot.
Sir, I'll answer your question about judicial
hang on, sir. This blind spot that somehow we have to actually behave in. The only branch of the government that I vote for is the executive and the parliament. These are the two institutions which actually have my representation. The only one that does not is the Supreme Court of Pakistan. And then we are told that we should be free to attack the parliament, the executive, because there is not going to be any repercussion. But we have to turn a blind eye to the Supreme Court's conduct. Every question I ask you about Supreme Court in the end becomes a question of parliament's conduct, and then it becomes the executive's concern. So let us actually call it a new religion and start behaving that there's a new religion which is led by Supreme Court of Pakistan then.
No, I'll answer your question head on. First of all, you mentioned a couple of times what's the judicial doctrine or what's the precept of law pursuant to which the Supreme Court can issue an order mandating or obligating the State Bank of Pakistan to make a bank transfer. Right. And you also used the word unprecedented multiple times. So, and this shouldn't come across as me defending that order. Please hear me out. The High Courts and the Supreme Court issues orders to the executive all the time. In fact, most of the writs filed in the High Courts are about certain executive orders, either striking down the executive orders or praying that the executive behaves in certain ways. Writs in normal circumstances are only maintainable against executive actions and regarding the vires of law. So you can request that the court orders that the executive reinstates an employee that has been unfairly terminated. For instance, in the local government issue, there's an article in the Constitution called 140A. There's been various litigations before the High Courts and the Supreme Court in which it has been prayed that the judiciary directs the executive to hold elections, orders the executive to hold elections.
Right. So by the way, the only time, Darugar Sahab, I actually use word unprecedented regarding conduct, in my opinion, not in my question, that was essentially about the way a bill has been stopped by Supreme Court before it became
right.
But my question, it was my question whether it is unprecedented or not. And my concern is that, and I get it, that Supreme Court might actually have, or other courts might have been actually taking up matters with various branches of government. But the biggest problem at this moment is you're talking about two autonomous bodies and one pillar of state. You're talking about Parliament of Pakistan, and then you're talking about State Bank of Pakistan and also Election Commission of Pakistan. By the way, we are told that no other judge should be able to take a suo motu with the exception of Chief Justice. But there was this two-member bench which in Dogar case regarding CCPO actually summoned the Chief Election Commission of Pakistan, thoroughly harassed him and then sent him back. So that is also happening. But I have to actually very quickly now move to the financial side of the question. Let me thank you, Ali Javed Darugar Saab and Barrister Haris Ahmed, for being part of the program. Let me now very quickly go to Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, the question at this moment, and I requested you in this program regarding the IMF deal, but I want you to actually ask you about this case of Supreme Court actually ordering the State Bank of Pakistan to release funds as well for the elections. Does it not actually undercut the whole thesis of the autonomy of State Bank of Pakistan?
Pitafi bhai, always a pleasure to be on your show. So let me say that Article 78 and Article 79 of the Constitution are very clear on this, and they give this power of the expenditure that has to be done out of the Federal Consolidated Fund. That is what lies with the State Bank of Pakistan as the collected monies, revenues, non-tax revenues that lie with the State Bank of Pakistan. And the custodialship of that lies with the Majlis-e-Shura as per Article 79. So one has to be very clear on that. Now, number two, who could ask for these funds to be given to ECP or somewhere else? Again, if you go to Public Finance Act 2019, Clause 22, it is the federal government or the Ministry of Finance acting as an arm of the federal government. I have read the order that you're talking about. So asking State Bank of Pakistan, somehow I think there has been a miscommunication there by the State Bank people that somehow they are custodians of this. I don't think they are custodians of the money, which is Federal Consolidated Fund, what we call account number 1. The federal government is what should be the decision maker in this case. Even if the federal government was to comply with this, this is how it will work. Under Article 84A, which is the supplementary grant, the federal government will ask ECC and the cabinet to give approval of the money that has to be given to ECP, the 21 billion rupees, and then it will work. So now let's see how the federal government reacts to this order of compliance under Article 84A. There is also the case that this money has to be created from somewhere. I keep saying this, that I don't think there is any money lying around. And the problem there is that we are with the IMF. And when you're with the IMF, literally every billion that you move here and there has to be discussed with them. 21 billion has to come out of either your operating expenditure, out of, let's say, PSDP cutting, because, you cannot borrow more probably because, again, you'd have to go back to the IMF, ask them, discuss, and move on. So I think that's where we stand. Let's see how the federal government reacts to this point of the Supreme Court asking them to move on this, again, through Article 84, having the cabinet's permission to do that, and ultimately take it to the Majlis-e-Shura, the National Assembly, for approval. In our case, we usually do it at the budget time. It can be done at any time. It doesn't say that it has to go at the budget time. It can be done at any time. So this is where we stand. We wait for the reaction of the federal government on this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is very coherent response to my question. But let me also talk about the image of State Bank of Pakistan as an autonomous body, especially when we are dealing with IMF. Because in the past we have seen when we actually agreed in principle to this program where we are at right now, it was also conceded that the State Bank of Pakistan will be autonomous. And when, at least in optics, when the Supreme Court of Pakistan actually calls the governor of State Bank over and then instructs him, seeks all the details of financials, and then asks them to release so and so fund, does it not undercut the image of autonomy in the country or all over the world?
So again, I mean, Pitafi sir, one thing is there that there is an impasse between the two major arms of the state, and so we are witnessing this kind of act. in the end, I think some reconciliation somewhere has to take place, where all the arms of the state exist in a more coherent manner, act in a more coherent manner, and I think the state banks function again. So there is an Article 33 of the Public Finance Act 2019, which says that state bank will only maintain the accounts of the federal government as the federal government may desire, and the federal government has its accounts. So how the federal government will react vis-a-vis the state bank having this via media, whether it will change the ECP ceiling of the account held with the AGP to move forward. So these are the moving parts now that we have to see to see how they will unwind. And let's hope there is still, as I keep saying, certainty will come with some kind of reconciliation taking place, some larger agreement on how things will move,
Right.
and let's hope. And as we have moved with the IMF, my most concern remains that we move with the IMF and we are able to fulfill all those things without creating any new moving part, so that the fund can complete the staff level agreement with Pakistan.
Again, I want to actually come back to the possibility of staff level agreement with the IMF, and we will actually in a short while actually proceed to that. But very quickly, I recall that you and I were together in an Urdu program where I asked you regarding the matter. At that time, there was this super tax that was actually being enforced on LSMs, and you actually welcomed that. After that, we have seen that the Supreme Court of Pakistan actually took up that matter and reduced that one-time super tax from 10% to 4%. And because of that, perhaps many people think that the country had to hike its GST because it is an indirect tax. If you cannot actually get that much money from direct tax, then you have to generate that revenue stream from somewhere else. The matters regarding economy keep on ending up with the Supreme Court or other judiciary or judicial branch per se. And in the end, it seems that there are moments when perhaps the Supreme Court or other courts in their judgment are doing the right thing, but it actually ends up undermining the economic condition of the country. Do you think that there should be some special benches to take care of the economic matters, or there should be some legislation creating some court, some benches, some other methods where technocrats, especially understanding the economic matters, are also sitting, and they can actually help the state in understanding what is going on?
So, Pitafi sir, this is a very, very important point. And, there have been a number of cases which have been related to the economy, GIDC. I'm now talking closer to the taxation. So the other case was, the cess that we had levied, and a big amount of collection had come in. Similarly, on the taxation side, here's my point of view. One, I think over judicialization of aspects that relate to the executive and the political sphere is also not good for the country. These are aspects that, the political aspects should be done and dusted with the political parties. They should be mature enough to handle those things. And, these are all mature people, having worked with all of them, whether it's PDM parties, the PTI. I think that's one aspect now they have to think about. The other is that when there is a levy of the taxation, you just rightly said 71% of taxation in Pakistan is indirect taxation. It's just not fair. It's just not right. We got rid of the wealth tax. We don't have a proper capital gains tax on property. We can't tax our retail. We can't tax our urban property. We can't tax our agriculture income. 3 billion rupees from the whole country. These are very serious issues. Now, understanding of these issues, you've dealt with economic issues as a journalist for a long time, and you've understood them. I, being a student, have understood them. So to imagine that I understand the constitution would be a flaw. Similarly, I think the courts also have to have, maybe as they say, expert helping them so that they can reach better decisions, because these are matters of very serious kind. But on the other hand, we also, the other point would be, we also have to be very good at doing taxation, which cannot be challenged in the courts. We have to improve our way of taxing people as well. By we, I mean the federal government, FBR, the policy makers. So on both sides, technocracy is going to help. There is no doubt about it. Whether it's helping raise the standard of kind of taxation we do in Pakistan, and that's the next 5 years. If you cannot move over 10% of GDP, so what does that mean? Our total tax collection on the FBR has been 10% of GDP for the last 1 decade, and we have said that we want to increase the number of taxpayers, widen the tax base, increase the direct taxation. But as a country, whether it's our ability to do it, our competence to do it, cases held in the court, I still think that there are the money in the courts itself is very high, where there are stay orders on the government. There also, we've always said that after 6 months these should be vacated. I think that's the clause that exists. But they linger on, and thousands of billions are held in this. So these are very, very important points. Pakistan with 10% tax to GDP ratio is not going anywhere but to the IMF, because domestic resource mobilization is not enough, and your debt servicing is going up, your needs for the BESP are going up, your needs for the running the armed and the civil bureaucracy are going up, your PSDP are going up. These are really, really now serious matters. And again, I hope competence all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. And I totally get that. We are going to actually talk now about IMF and the possibility of the deal. But before that, I don't ask you, Khaqan, Najeeb sir, because what I'm going to say is controversial. But I just this whole thing, this question and your answer then reminded me of one comment by Justice Munib Akhtar in one of the hearings, where he said that if PSL can take place in the country, I mean, that involves millions of rupees, not billions. Why can't we hold elections in Punjab? So there seems to be some, lack of understanding about economics, perhaps on the benches as well. Usually there's a difference between a million and a billion. There are 3 more zeros in a billion. So perhaps someday there's going to be a bench that actually takes care of economic matters and has twin capacity to understand the law and then also understand the economic matters as well. But Khaqan, Najeeb Sahab, now that UAE has also given assurance, do you think that there are any remaining bottlenecks in the way of the staff level agreement between Pakistan and IMF? And then in coming days, how exactly is it going to play out?
So sigh of relief to see not only UAE with the $1 billion, $2 billion from Saudi Arabia confirmed, and as we talk today, 300 million has also come in from China. This is in addition to $1.7 billion that came in the last couple of weeks. So all in all, 2 billion back from China, and the confirmations from. So all the friendly countries have now come through. This is the financing gap of the $6 billion that we were talking about. So that seems to have been completed. Some monies have to flow from multilaterals. I think there is confirmation on that side as well, the kind of flows that would happen. So all in all, this big hump has now been crossed. The only thing which not worries me, I think worry is a bigger word, is that Pakistan, the cross subsidy on the petroleum products. I think the Q Block Ministry of Finance has confirmed to the IMF that we are not moving ahead immediately with this. It will take time. We are working through the intricacies of how this will work. And once the intricacies are worked out, we will come back to you. So I'm really hoping that this would not become a hurdle. The other thing is, if we were to go through with the 21 billion rupees, a quick nod of the fund would, I think, would be required in terms of at least, how the handling of the money, which I think technically would be a supplementary grant. That's the authority federal government will
I'm
use.
glad that actually you brought that up, because we saw the local office of IMF actually issuing a statement, especially saying that it does not have any issue with the financial arrangement for elections, and that it does not concern itself because all these matters are already computed in. What would you say to them, because this statement came a few weeks earlier when this explanation was being presented to the Supreme Court of Pakistan, sir?
So I would say that if the budget changes by 21 billion, the authorities would have to probably put forward whether that's coming from cutting the operating expenditure, whether that's coming from increasing the fiscal deficit, whether that's coming from cutting the PSDP. So, or let's say somewhere there was some money that was still saved in a bulk fund or something that they could have used. So I think just that conversation would still need to be had. It couldn't be that there was no conversation. And then the conversation on the petroleum levy, and that would get us over. But what my concern is that this should happen next week now. And Pitafi Saab, the reason I say that is that I leave you with this thought, is that I have to look at timings. Pakistan has to do two more reviews with the IMF before 30th of June, as this program comes to an end if it is not extended by 30th of June. So if we have to do two other reviews, which again, in my opinion, should now be combined, the 10th and 11th review, they should happen sometime late May, just before the budget come in. So it's a heavy toll on the government right now, on the authorities, not only the government, the State Bank and all the other authorities that are working with the IMF from the Pakistan side. So you got to remember, close the 9th review in the next couple of days, have a board meeting somewhere in May, then move on to do the 10th and 11th review, present the budget. So heavy toll there. So I'm hoping that these two things could be easily, glided through with the bank, with the fund, and Pakistan is able to move forward. You got to remember, not doing the fund is holding our pharmaceutical import at the port. It is holding the 5, 6, 7 million bales that we have to get of cotton because of course our dollar reserves position
Absolutely.
remains
that is a point well made, Dr. Khaqan. Najeeb, thank you very much for your pithy thoughts and your views that are always helpful. Viewers, if I can see it here, sitting here, and if Dr. Khaqan Najeeb can see this, and the fund will also perhaps need this, there are two concerns that come to my mind. Why is it that the Supreme Court of Pakistan does not see the fact that with this kind of financial space that we have got, of fiscal space, everything will have to be cleared by the fund? And why is it that the only people that we really need at this moment, this government, because it has to carry this burden which is very heavy, you keep on sparring with the same people, right? This is the first question that comes to my mind. The second question that comes to my mind is regarding the optics of everything that has happened, including that very statement coming from IMF's local office, when it actually said that all these matters are actually computed in. So they'll need also, whenever we have to actually give an explanation to the IMF, they'll have to come up with an explainer why did they actually misguide deliberately or unwittingly the people when they said that there is no clarification needed on these matters. With all that, at this moment when the country is going through so much, adding to the burden of state and creating more troubles by the custodians of the state, by self-styled custodians of the state, is an unbecoming thing, and it will lead to nothing good. This was today's program. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.